All right, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of the Camper 7.0 build. Hey, recently I saw a post on social media. Somebody had taken a screenshot, an image essentially from one of my videos where I was discussing the use of body filler on the quarter-inch camper builds, like which this one will be. And the person posted this picture on a social media site and was asking people for their advice in terms of whether it was a good product. Um, I somehow stumbled across it, and when I initially saw it, I'll be candid with you, my initial, just like very immediate emotional reaction was kind of maybe a mild offense, kind of like, hey, why is this person, they don't take my word for it. And immediately that kind of initial feeling was tempered, and I realized that this individual who posted this was doing the exact right thing. They were doing the right thing. One thing I've emphasized in other videos, and I just kind of want to double take here, is um, I don't want any of you out there to watch my videos in isolation and take every bit of information I take by itself and assume that that's the best way to build these campers or do anything else that I talk about. Um, I'm just, relatively speaking, just a regular Joe. I'm not a professional. It's not like building these or anything related was my job. I had a job that was something completely different, not even in the same ballpark. And I'm self-taught, just like many of you. I've read stuff, watched YouTube videos, and most importantly, have learned through a lot of trial and error and experimentation. Um, but with that being said, I'm certainly, everything I say. I mean, if I'm presenting it, I at the time I'm presenting it, I certainly feel like it's good information, or at least I give some caveat if for some reason I don't. But I certainly acknowledge that there's times where I could be wrong, or maybe if I'm not necessarily wrong, there could be better ways of doing things. My long-winded point to all of this is, for those consuming this material, um, I recommend that in addition to what I may be showing, you guys do your own research, do your own experiments, um, certainly look to other people, and collectively put all of this information together. And if you decide to go out and build your own creation, you do it from knowledge that you've gotten from multiple places. Now, probably many of you guys recognize that my videos aren't the classic how-to, in the sense that I'm recording myself, at least frequently, actually building stuff. I typically focus my videos more on walking through, describing my mindset, describing why I'm doing things, and I do that um, on purpose. I mean, number one, one very practical reason is I just don't, I like doing the work in isolation, and I don't want to feel like I'm always behind a camera when I'm, doing what I'm doing. But the more important thing is I kind of want these videos to serve as inspiration, both to motivate someone to feel like they can build, but also inspiration and ideas. But I really want to foster an environment where it's not just a very simple how-to. I want you guys to be able to go out and consolidate a bunch of information and produce something that is truly yours. That's another reason why a lot of times I don't get fixated on specific measurements. Like I could say, hey, the door has to be 22 inches wide, but I don't do that. I could say maybe I made the door that wide, but I want you guys to be able to create your own idea. And that's where my channel comes from. If you're looking for a strictly A, B, C, D equals, such and such kind of place, I'm not that guy. I'm more of a broad-based thing, and that's the way I expect you guys to consume the information and put it together. So now, with all those things being said, I'm not trying to minimize what I have learned. I think I have a pretty good track record of building good campers. I think I've been pretty open in things that I've changed and improved as I've evolved and moved on. there's probably not many people out there exactly like myself who, as a DIYer slash hobbyist, have built as many campers as I have in a short period of time. So I do think I have garnered a fair amount of experience, and I have put a lot of energy into testing different things. But I'm always evolving my processes. If you watched my very first camper build up to this very next one, I've learned stuff through the way. That is my journey. So to all of you out there, be nice. I don't want people being rude or derogatory in comments or in other locations, but I encourage you guys, watch what I'm doing, maybe garner some ideas, some insights, but look to other places and other people. Consolidate all the information. And then if you choose to take on a project like this, you guys can present it out there. So I just wanted to give you guys that heads up. Let's move into progress on Camper 7.0. All right, everybody. So this is part 3 of the Camper 7.0 build. And as you guys can see, we've got the initial columns and beams up. So last week, just to recap, I touched on the final completion of the tub, which included mounting the wings. And I talked in detail. Keep in mind, guys, this is wide angle, so it might look a little distorted. But I talked in detail about how I made the beams, including the angular portion, which will define part of the roof line later, and the columns, and how they mount to the tub itself. I told you guys that I laminate or essentially glue together the 2¼ inch chunks of cedar for my columns. I told you for a couple reasons. One, as you guys can see here, it allows for a really, really nice solid glue joint. So this portion of the beam structure slid right in there. And if you guys recall, the center portion was longer than this, and obviously I've trimmed this off. But now you have, I believe this is called a saddle joint. Another viewer filled me in on that some time ago. If I've got that wrong, let me know. But you guys can just imagine, I mean, you've got a substantial glue joint here between the beam structure and the column. I zipped in a few screws just to hold it tight, but truth be known, that glue joint is going to be super strong. And I just used traditional wood glue here. Now, another commenter, or another viewer commented on part 2 video, and he also, too, was talking about the benefits of gluing together laminating wood. In this part, it allowed me to make a very easy mortise, if you will, without having to carve it out. Obviously, I glued them together. I left the middle portion long, and that mortise slid into this joint here. So it's almost like you're making furniture. So laminating them together allows you to make, is an easier way to make some of that tricky jointery. Sorry about that. I like it because it, allows me to use the wood I want. But another viewer had mentioned that laminating the wood together also strengthens the entire piece. Because if this was one single piece of wood, and let's say you had a knot here, for example, the whole piece could be compromised by that. So you'd either have to be very selective. But if you're laminating it together, if one of these boards, I'm sure one of them has a knot, right here. So this would obviously be a weak spot in this particular board, right? But because it's sandwiched around other portions, little imperfections like that help hold it together. And another thing I wanted to mention, which I forgot to in last week's video about the benefit of laminating too, is the ability to work out slightly crooked wood. Now, we all run it through joiners and planers, but there's sometimes limits to that, or it's impractical. I found that when you glue these together, you can sometimes, if you got a slight bow or a little curve or something in a piece of wood, you can almost mash them together and straighten it out. And then I have a pretty solid bench here that's straight, so every time I put those together, I glue them down, or I clamp them down to the bench right after I glue them together, so the glue can set in place. And I found that even with some wood that have some pretty decent warping and imperfections, I can make very, very straight columns. So anyways, couple more benefits of laminating pieces of wood at various points in this project. But as we were, we covered the construction of the columns, beam structures, and then this right here is showing that solid glue joint about how they come together. I mean, this should by all stretch not be that strong, but this is still pretty rigid as it stands. I believe I showed this in a photo last week, but when I go to mount these columns into the tub structure, you can see how they come together. So you have an ingrain glue joint here, and of course, like I said, I'm just using traditional wood glue, which is obviously not that strong, but you have a pretty decent standard grain wood joint here, or glue joint there. You'll note that this 22.5-degree cut I put on here is a little wide, so it actually is over this lip. In later sections of the build, that will make a little more sense as to why I did that, but that was a key feature there. All right, so how did I mount these columns and get them nice and straight? So this might be sacrilege to some of you, but I have a couple utility squares here, and just the way that this is made with that angled cut on the column, if you carefully put them in place and pin it in real quick with a 16 or 18 gauge brad nailer, you're pretty close to being square on the platform. But what I do just to give it a little extra security is I'll actually put in two right angles there that I have, utility squares that I have lying around. I clamp them to the column. I can get it perfectly straight, and then I will drive. This is somewhat arbitrary, but I like these 8 by 1 3/4 inch deck screws. I like these as a good utility screw. There's other options. You could use a drywall screw or something. I just happen to like these. These particular screws do a really nice job recessing the head and whatever the work you're working on, because that way it doesn't stick out. You don't want that. And they seem to hold real well. Obviously, they're going to be corrosion resistant. They're a little expensive, but anyways. So I use those. And I'm not partial to this specific brand or anything. I just happen to use that particular one there. Anyways, but what I'll do is I'll use a couple of those, and I'll drive about 3 of these in here. So that's pulling this column tight with this angled piece that runs the length of the tub here. And then up underneath, let's see if I can get this here. You can see that right there. I just have I think it was a 3.5 or 3 inch wood screw that I would drive from underneath into here. I want this to be solid, but this, there's going to be a lot of other things that compound onto this, which is going to add to the rigidity here. I just want to show you this overlap here of what I was talking about. So that 23.5 degrees, and see how it overlaps on, sorry, I'm adjusting my zoom here, on this piece. And then the 1/4 inch wall structure will, or the sheathing on this will sit on there, and it will rest on top of this, and then I'll kind of zip off this sharp edge later. You guys will see that more, but just kind of note that a little detail like that, you just make that 23.5 degree a little higher than this, and that will allow that wood to rest right on top of there. So, all right, guys, I'm going to do a little bit more work, and we'll get back to it, but we covered a couple additional benefits of laminating the wood, the really strong furniture-like saddle joint there that holds the beam structure to the column, and we showed how the technique I use to attach those columns to the tub. And I'll show you guys just a little insight here into how, sorry about that. I'm going to show you guys a little insight here and just how perfect these lined up. I don't know how this is going to show in the film here, but my point is you want all of these columns to line up right there, and they can easily, through a couple degrees of arc, completely lined up with none of them showing on the other side. I think I was really proud. I thought that that'll give a nice straight wall edge. You can fudge around some things, but if you guys can take your time on getting these columns and beams just perfect, it's going to create a really, really seamless and nice looking body later in the build and just save you a lot of headaches. So, all right. All right, guys, I'm going to talk to you about acceptable errors and fixing problems. So let me tell you what's going on here. So I am right now in the process of mounting this column right here, okay? And I used my utility square method like I talked about in the last section there to square it up. And when I looked, I noticed that it was angling in just a little bit, okay? So what I did is I came over here and I had another smaller square. I think it's about, it's probably about a 16th. I'm sorry, 16th of an inch thick. And I put it underneath there, underneath that square, which pushed this column back and gave me, from the BIST, a visual sight, perfectly lined up series of columns, okay? My point here is these little, especially when you're working on a big project like this in terms of physical size, you're going to have small deviations. Obviously, the goal is to make everything as square and plumb and straight as you can, and I definitely subscribe to that. But every once in a while, you gotta make a little repair. Now, you could say, I'm going to stand to the 90-degree mark, and that's what I'm going to stick with. Or, and what I subscribe to and I suggest you do, is sometimes the eye is best, okay? What's really going to matter doesn't really matter. I mean, if you have huge deviations, you got other problems. But, you know, if this column is a degree or two off from 90 on that tub section, no one's going to see that. It's an irrelevant marker. No one's going to see that. But here, if you have that wall that dips in a little bit, that's definitely going to be visible. So, you know, don't feel bad if you got to make little adjustments like that. Now, if you had some real substantial differences, you probably got some other problems you need to look into it. All right, guys, but just letting you know, correct to the eye, and little problems or deviations are okay to deal with. All right, so what will be the overall shape of the camper is probably starting to become clear. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and let me show you what I got, and I'll just touch on a couple key features. So talked about putting in the columns and the beams. My next step was I put in some support members here that connect all of the columns. This will also serve as a flat mounting portion for the plywood that goes across the top on this angle. This frame is still a work in progress. As you guys can see here, I fabricated a piece that fits into that and provides a nice solid mounting surface for the vertical piece. Obviously, I need to complete those in the rest of these areas here. Got the window framed out. I was able to get some of those dual pane vinyl windows, the ones that open outwards instead of sliding. I was pretty excited about that. I'll talk about it in a later video, but I'll have to make a subframe for those, but you guys just have to take my word on it. I framed out what will be the needed opening here, which is 22 by 22. So we put in a couple cross beams here. The AC unit will sit up in this area. And so I went ahead and just mirrored both cross beams here to the height of that AC unit. And I added an additional reinforcement here because the AC unit is probably 30 or 40 pounds, if I remember correctly. Over here on this side, we've got a couple cross reinforcement sections. These are set at a different height than these over here, but that's set at this height because this will work with the countertop that will be in place over here. And then finally, another cross piece here that will tie into there. It's probably becoming quite obvious to you that the structural panel for the floor of the cab over will actually rest across here and attach into this member here. So I just went ahead and put this member at a low spot because I'll drive some big screws through here. And this will also give some strength to the overall frame for the cab over. I'll talk about the cab over in greater detail later, but just so you know, the full strength that cab over comes in from the shear strength when I actually put on the wall. It does not come in any exclusive fashion from this framing, but I still want it to be robust. But yeah, I'm very pleased with how this is. Sorry guys, but bouncing, tripping all over the place here. I'm very pleased with how this is turning out. I think that angle on the roof there is going to look real nice. As you guys can see, I angled it down in the rear, which is a little bit of a different design departure from what I typically do, but I think it'll look nice. The angle of that departure down is about 15 degrees, I believe. That's somewhat arbitrary. I mean, it's I was just kind of looking at it as to what I thought would, I don't want to go too much or too little, but I am, let me come over on this angle here. But I'm quite pleased, and what I'm referring to is how the rear slopes down right here. I'm quite pleased as to how that looks. And the frame is very rigid. Very rigid. It's amazingly rigid, actually. All right. And we'll talk about the door frames here. All right. So this, I use poplar. This is 1.5 inches thick here. Let me show you guys a little detail here. So this is I took a 1/2 inch bit and routed it down to about 3/16 of an inch. Later, and this is going to be quite a bit later in the build, I will mortise in for the hinges. The hinges and the entire door will be recessed into this door frame here. And this groove I cut here will allow the actual hinge pin area to slide in there and lock in. Keep in mind, I use security hinges, so they can't be removed. So I've had many comments of people seeing the hinge facing externally, worried about people popping the hinge and pulling off the door. That's not the case. They're security hinges, meaning you can't pull out the pin in there. Reason why I'm recessing that door in is I do think it looks nice that way, but also I made this camper to fit into my pickup truck, and I want to be able to close the tailgate. And I probably should have given myself about an extra inch of room, but it's going to be very tight. And I think I could probably have the hinges protruding out and it would be okay, but I didn't want to take any chances, so I thought I would recess them into the door frame. That way, this entire back, or at least the portion that is on the lower end, which will be in the bed of the truck there, will be as flat as possible for when that door shuts. I might have mentioned this in another video, and if I have, I apologize. But if you guys notice, the door is clearly offset, okay? On most of my campers, I think maybe all of them, the door has been offset in one way or the other, and I typically offset it on this side. In this camper, this space here, which is where you see that fridge, is going to have a bunch of different appliances. So there's going to be some extra weight. The porta potty will be down there. The fridge will be there. There'll be a power bank here, and the AC will sit up here. And I got thinking about it. I was looking at my truck and a couple other trucks, and the fuel tanks all pretty much sit on the driver's side. So keep in mind that this is the passenger side because we're looking at the rear forward. And I'm sure the manufacturers account for that extra weight of that fuel tank, but I went ahead and decided just to change it up, I'm going to shift the door to that driver's side, and the additional weight of all those appliances which will be in this corner, I will put on the non-fuel tank side. Guys, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if that will make a difference in the long run, but it doesn't hurt the build in any way, so I thought I would just go ahead and put that in place. So thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.